The courtroom was filled with the quiet murmur of spectators and the soft rustling of papers. The air felt heavy with tension as the case continued. Ava stood at the front, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the papers in front of her. She was just 17 years old, and today she was about to face the most challenging moment of her life. A crowd of curious onlookers filled the courtroom, some of them whispering, others watching her closely. At the center of it all was the judge, a man in his 60s with a sharp, almost mocking gaze. Judge Calloway had seen hundreds of cases in his long career. He was known for his cold, no-nonsense approach. But today, he looked particularly irritated. His wrinkled face was set in a permanent frown, and he had a certain smugness in his eyes as he looked down at Ava. Ava wasn't just any teenager. She had a sharp mind, a passion for justice, and a dream of becoming a lawyer. However, no one in the courtroom knew that yet. They saw a young girl who was about to represent herself in court, a seemingly impossible task for someone so young. Most people thought she didn't stand a chance. The case had begun with a simple enough accusation. Her older brother, Malik, had been caught in a minor dispute with a store owner. But for Ava, it was more than that. Her brother had been wrongly accused, and she was determined to prove it. She knew the law, and she knew she could win, but she also knew the odds were against her. Judge Calloway leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk in front of him. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Ava. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You, a teenager, are representing your brother in court. Do you even know what you're doing?" Ava felt her face flush as the judge's words hit her like a slap. The courtroom grew quiet, every eye on her. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their doubt. She had spent weeks preparing, reading law books late into the night, practicing her arguments, but none of that seemed to matter now. The judge's sneering expression made her feel small. "I know the law, Your Honor," Ava stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. "And I know my brother is innocent. The store owner is lying. I can prove it." The judge scoffed, his eyes flashing with a mix of amusement and disdain. "Oh, really?" he said, his voice loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. "Tell me, little girl, what makes you think you can prove anything? You're just a kid. You don't even have a lawyer." Ava's hands clenched into fists, but she refused to let her anger show. She wasn't about to let the judge mock her. She had worked too hard for this moment, and she wasn't going to back down now. As she stood there, trying to gather her thoughts, she noticed the judge's smirk. He clearly thought she would fail, just like everyone else. But something deep inside her stirred. She was more than just a teenager in this courtroom. She was someone who had studied the law with determination and a fierce sense of justice. She wouldn't let anyone, especially a judge, undermine her fight for her brother. "Your Honor," Ava began again, her voice quieter but more confident this time. "I may be young, but I have studied the law, and I believe the evidence will prove that my brother did nothing wrong. Please allow me to present it." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated but also intrigued. He glanced down at his watch, clearly eager to move on, but something in Ava's words made him pause. "All right," he said dismissively, waving his hand in the air. "Let's see what you've got, kid. But don't waste my time." Ava nodded and took a deep breath. This was her chance. She knew she had to prove herself, not just to the judge, but to everyone in that courtroom. As she stepped forward to present her case, she could feel the weight of every eye on her. The judge might have mocked her, but she wasn't about to let that stop her. The air in the courtroom felt thick with anticipation. Every word, every move she made would matter. As Ava began to present the evidence she had gathered, the room grew quieter. The judge, who had once mocked her, now seemed more focused, his eyes following her every word. Ava knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge was still ahead. But as she stood there, speaking with confidence and clarity, something inside her clicked. She wasn't just a teenager. She was a fighter, determined to prove that age had nothing to do with her ability to win this case. The courtroom was still, every eye locked on Ava as she carefully presented her evidence. She felt the weight of everyone's gaze, but she refused to let it intimidate her. Her voice was steady as she pointed to the documents in front of her, proof that her brother was being wrongfully accused. Ava had spent countless hours collecting these papers. She had reviewed store surveillance footage, interviewed witnesses, and found inconsistencies in the store owner's story. She had done everything right. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't escape the feeling that it wasn't just about her brother anymore. It was about proving herself to the world. However, Judge Calloway wasn't buying it. He adjusted his glasses and sighed loudly, a sound meant to convey his growing impatience. "Is this some sort of joke?" he asked, leaning forward and looking at the papers Ava had placed before him. "You expect me to take this seriously? Do you even understand what you're presenting?" Ava held her ground. "Yes, Your Honor. This evidence shows that the store owner lied about what happened that day. I have witnesses who will testify, and I can prove my brother's innocence." The judge chuckled, his voice dripping with condescension. "Witnesses? You're a teenager with no legal training, standing in front of me trying to present evidence like a seasoned attorney. You don't even know what you're doing." The room was silent as Ava took a deep breath, refusing to back down. She had expected this kind of response. She had studied the cases where young people were underestimated, and she had prepared for this exact moment. Her voice, though calm, was firm. "Your Honor, I may not have a degree or years of experience, but I know what justice looks like, and I know that my brother doesn't deserve to be punished for something he didn't do." The judge's expression hardened, and he glared at her with growing disdain. "You're wasting my time, young lady. Do you think you can just walk in here and lecture me on justice? You're nothing more than a child playing pretend. Do you really think I'll believe your story over the store owners?" Ava's heart sank. The judge's words stung, but she knew she couldn't let him see how much they hurt. This was exactly what people expected, to see a young girl crumble under pressure. But she wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Not now, not ever. Before she could respond, the judge raised his hand, silencing her. "Enough. I'm going to dismiss these so-called witnesses and this evidence. You've proven nothing, and you're only embarrassing yourself." The words hit her like a blow to the chest. The courtroom was deathly silent. Ava felt as if the walls were closing in around her. Everyone in that room had expected her to fail, but now it seemed like the judge was making it official. He was rejecting her, the evidence, and her entire case with nothing more than a wave of his hand. A wave of frustration and anger bubbled up inside her, but Ava fought to keep it under control. She couldn't lose her temper. She couldn't let him see her doubt. Her brother's future, her entire case, depended on her keeping her focus. Suddenly, the doors of the courtroom opened with a soft creak, and Ava's heart skipped a beat. Her older brother Malik, the person this case was all about, walked in, his expression tense. He was in his late 20s, and he had been the one to encourage Ava to follow her dream of becoming a lawyer. But seeing him now, standing in that courtroom, made her feel more alone than ever. The judge's expression softened slightly when he saw Malik, but his smugness didn't fade. "Ah, the defendant's brother. How nice of you to join us. But I suggest you take a seat. This case is a waste of everyone's time." Malik stood tall, his eyes narrowing at the judge. But instead of speaking, he looked at Ava and gave her a small nod, a silent reassurance. Ava knew that look. It was the look of someone who trusted her completely. He was counting on her to do what no one else believed she could. The judge turned back to Ava, his eyes gleaming with a mix of pity and superiority. "You know, I could just end this case right here. I don't need to hear any more nonsense from you. It's clear to me that this whole situation is a farce." Ava's hands shook, but she stood her ground. This was it. This was the moment she had been preparing for. The judge wanted to dismiss her case. He wanted to throw everything out. He wasn't going to get away with it, not without hearing the truth. She took a deep breath and looked the judge straight in the eye. "Your Honor, I've come this far, and I'm not giving up. This case isn't just about the evidence. It's about doing what's right, and I won't stop until I prove that my brother is innocent." For the first time since she had entered the courtroom, the judge paused. His face tightened, and his smug expression faltered. He clearly hadn't expected this from her. The tension in the room was palpable. The judge's arrogance was beginning to crack. Ava wasn't done yet. She had something up her sleeve, a surprise that would make even Judge Calloway rethink his decision. The game was far from over, and Ava knew that she was about to turn the tables. Ava's heart raced as she stared down Judge Calloway, who seemed certain that her case was doomed. But Ava wasn't done. She knew something he didn't, something that would shift the entire case in her favor. With a calm, steady voice, she asked, "Your Honor, may I call my surprise witness?" The judge rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed, but allowed it. Ava stepped aside, and through the courtroom door, a police officer walked in, holding a thick folder. The officer approached the judge's bench and placed the folder in front of him. Judge Calloway's expression shifted as he opened it, revealing crucial evidence: the store owner's criminal record, hidden ties to illegal activities, and a history of dishonesty in his business dealings. The courtroom gasped. Ava had anticipated this moment, knowing the store owner's past would be his downfall. The judge was no longer smiling. This was only the beginning, and Ava was just getting started. Judge Calloway's eyes widened as he scanned the documents in front of him. The smug confidence he had shown earlier began to fade, replaced by a look of uncertainty. The room buzzed with whispers, the tension thickening. Ava watched as the judge turned to the store owner, whose face had drained of color. The once confident man now shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ava's voice was steady as she spoke. "This criminal record shows a pattern of deceit. The store owner has been involved in multiple fraudulent activities, and I have the proof to show he's lying about the incident with my brother." The judge, now visibly rattled, glanced at the defense lawyer, who remained silent, unsure of how to proceed. Ava's move had turned the case upside down, and in that moment, it was clear she wasn't just a teenager anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. Judge Calloway sat in stunned silence, his fingers tracing the edges of the criminal records Ava had presented. His confidence had completely eroded. The store owner shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face flushed with panic. The courtroom, once filled with skeptical murmurs about Ava's age and inexperience, was now hushed, hanging on every word. Ava stepped forward, her voice firm. "This is the truth, Your Honor. The store owner framed my brother to cover up his own criminal activities. The evidence is irrefutable." The judge, clearly rattled, glanced from the file to Ava, then to Malik, who was watching intently. The room fell into a tense silence as Calloway paused, the weight of Ava's words sinking in. For the first time, the arrogant judge wasn't so sure of himself. His eyes flickered nervously, betraying his growing doubt. Ava had done the unthinkable. She had proven the case against the man who had dismissed her from the start. Would the judge finally see the truth? The suspense hung in the air. As the courtroom waited in suspended silence, Judge Calloway cleared his throat and looked back at the documents Ava had presented. His face was no longer smug or dismissive, but instead, it was one of disbelief. I wasn't aware of this," he muttered, his voice barely audible. He glanced nervously at the defense lawyer, who seemed just as stunned as everyone else in the room. Ava's heart raced, but she kept her composure. Without warning, the store owner suddenly stood up, his face twisted in anger. "This is all lies. She's just a kid trying to ruin me," he shouted, his voice cracking. Ava didn't flinch. She knew he was cornered, his lies unraveling right in front of everyone. "You're just trying to distract the court from the truth," she shot back, her voice unwavering. But then, just as things seemed like they were about to take another dramatic turn, A phone rang, a call that would change everything. The judge, clearly flustered, answered it. His face drained of color as he listened, his hand shaking slightly as he held the receiver. What? This can't be. The room fell silent, all eyes now on Judge Calloway. What had just been revealed to him? The tension was palpable. The audience waited on edge as the judge set the receiver down slowly, his eyes now filled with shock. "This case is far more complicated than I thought," he said, his voice low and steady. Something even bigger was unfolding, and Ava knew it was only a matter of time before the truth would fully come to light. The courtroom was electric with suspense as Judge Calloway stood, his hand gripping the bench for support. The news on the phone call had clearly shaken him to his core. Ava could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about her brother's case anymore. Something bigger was at play. The judge took a deep breath, then turned to face the courtroom. I've just been informed that there's a significant development in this case. It seems this is no longer just a local matter. The Pentagon has requested involvement," he announced, his voice echoing in the silent room. A collective gasp spread through the courtroom. The store owner, who had been shouting just moments before, now stood frozen, his face pale. Ava's eyes widened in shock. The Pentagon. How could they possibly be involved? The judge continued, his voice steady but filled with authority. "The Pentagon has evidence that this case is connected to a much larger criminal operation. We are to suspend these proceedings until further notice, and a full investigation will be launched immediately." Ava could hardly believe what she was hearing. The case she had worked so tirelessly on had just turned into something much bigger, something that no one had ever expected. As the judge banged his gavel, declaring a temporary recess, Ava felt a wave of relief wash over her. But she also knew this was just the beginning. The Pentagon's involvement meant this case was far from over. Ava had exposed the truth, but now the world would have to face the consequences, and she would be right there, standing tall, watching as justice unfolded on a scale she had never imagined.